All right, welcome to another episode of whatever this channel is going to be. Me just share my thoughts on things that I see on the internet. Once again, as I said before, I want to get back into the habit of creating, specifically like putting content out on like YouTube and things like that. So something I want to do is react and respond, to this video right here that I was watching just now. So I love Isaac Arthur. I think Isaac Arthur is an incredible person, like creator. I've been watching their stuff for I don't know years now. So I'm a huge fan of what they do, and a lot of what they do has inspired me to create the Building Better Futures, series I'm working on, and that's actually something I want to, kind of finish this week. And so I was like, I saw this on my timeline, but I was like, I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna wait to watch this because I know this is gonna be huge, like inspiration, motivation for me to finish my first video on Building Better Future series, which I'm gonna have a whole separate channel for. It's gonna be like, I'm really excited about that. But something I've been struggling with is like, I feel like I've bitten off a little bit too much to start with, because my first episode, which is really episode 0, was like the introduction. I was able to write like a whole article in like a week. It's like 10,000 words or something like that, probably a little bit more around that time. And then I did a podcast. I recorded that whole thing as a script, and I was going to record it and make it a video. But something about making videos has been just very difficult for me. And so this is another reason why I'm like, let me practice making videos again, and then go back to the Building Better Futures thing. But as I was listening to this, as I was watching this, I was like, damn, man, like there's just so many thoughts I was having as I was watching it, and it wouldn't really do to make a comment about every single thing. So I was like, you know what? I've been in this thing, let me do a little video as I'm watching this and sharing the thoughts out loud. That way I can go back and be like, oh yeah, okay, these are all the thoughts. I don't have to put everything in the comment section, but also I can practice doing this, and hopefully I can share some of my own thoughts on the future in a way that will hopefully inspire other people to think about the future in different ways as well. And you'll know what I mean as we get into this. Some of my thoughts are going to be a little bit are going to be fairly different than Isaac Arthur's, but that's not like a critique necessary, or maybe it will be a critique of how Isaac Arthur kind of views these things, but not necessarily a negative one. It's just like constructive, right? Is how we build towards the future, or towards different futures, right? And it's just different perspectives of things. So all that aside, maybe I didn't have to say all that, but I think it's the context is useful. Anyways, we'll get into it. And fair warning, I did put this on 2x speed because I didn't want this to be a super long video. And further, I'm only starting about, 20 minutes in, because the first couple minutes, first half is like a narrative, which is great. I enjoyed it. And I specifically went to the one he did with this one is unlisted because he made two versions, one with like different voices and one with just his voice. And I wanted to see what his vision was, so I was like, let me listen to the one with multiple voices. He does use AI voices in there, and you can say what you feel about that. But personally, I like the different narratives. I like using different voices for different narratives, and that's something I would like to do far in the future. Personally, I would try my best to try and find different voice actors, or use a program like 11 Labs. I use that at my job, where voice actors actually are paid directly to train the AI on their voice. So the AI is usually way better. It's not even really AI. It's like, it's essentially automating a voice actor's voice, right? And allowing that voice actor to distribute their voice to tons more people, and those voice actors get paid for it. So but that's why I prefer 11 Labs if you're going to use AI voices. But anyways, all that aside, the first half of this is a narrative. It was great, but I was just absorbing it. I didn't really have a huge amount of thoughts on it and stuff like that. It was just like, okay, cool, great narrative. But this second half is just like him breaking down like what it might be, what life might be like in 500 years, right? And this is where a lot of my thoughts come in. So I figure I'm gonna start the video here. So once again, go watch the video for yourself. This version or the other version, up to you. I'm starting here. Here we go.
AI to the future, then intuition, which can start to break down dealing with vast scales. When I was thinking about how many people might be alive in the year 2525, I ran the same issue I had in life in 2323 AD, where I somewhat arbitrarily settled on 100 billion, a plausible and round number. For today's episode, I went with a trillion for the same reasoning. Both estimates assume humanity isn't reproducing as rapidly as in earlier eras, but that advances in technology have significantly extended lifespans and fertility periods. I suspect that by the end of this...
Yeah, so this first part alone, I was just like, the scale is incredible. Like, think about it for a second. 100 billion people, right, is a lot. We only have, what, 8 billion people today? And everybody was like, oh, it's too much people, overpopulation, blah, 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 blah. But something I really enjoy about this channel specifically, and many other people who have a better idea of scale and like human ingenuity, is in understanding that overpopulation isn't really the problem, right? Like I've said this before in my podcast and other channels, like it's not about overpopulation, it's about distribution of resources. It's about, the scale of like the density of people in a specific area and how are they using those resources, right? We're animals, but we're not the same as every other animal, right? In that, yes, we're animals, and like you can have too many animals in one area, and that can be harmful for the environment. But with humans, we're an animal that can think, right? That can build tools, that can adjust both ourselves and the environment to better fit each other. Now, unfortunately, a lot of that has not been used very well recently. Whereas humans have been building, have been destroying the environment for their purposes, but that's not the exclusive, that's not all humans can do, right? We can just as easily, maybe not just as easily, debatable, but we can also, right, create technologies and environments, or create technologies and societies, cities, and things like that also help the environment, right? And so that's why overpopulation isn't really a problem. You can have 100 billion people, on this earth, maybe, I don't know for sure, but I'm sure people can figure out a way to make that feasible for both humans and in the environment. And you may think that, oh, no, that's impossible. But to me, the idea of that's impossible is just completely, like, if you believe in science at this point, technology at this point, there's just no point. You don't even have to believe it. If you use any bit of technology at this point, I think it's ridiculous to say something is impossible, right? Because we don't really know what the realm of possibility is. That's what's so amazing about being human, is like, many people didn't think cell phones were possible, right? Plastics are possible. The computer that we're looking at this was possible, but we figured out how to do this thing, right? So anyways, all that to say, when I heard that, there's 100 billion people and now he's talking about a trillion people, that's, the scale is just amazing to think about. And even though he just kind of threw that number in there just to like, play around this stuff, I think being able to think about, at least try and think about these scales is really important.
This century, accidental pregnancy will be an unusual concept, and unwanted pregnancy even rarer, as we have perfected those sorts of reproductive technologies. At the same time, it will likely be possible to have healthy children at age 6.
So that's another thing I want to touch on too, is like my bit of critique with Isaac Arthur is that he kind of frames things as in, oh, this is what we will do, or this is how things will go, in a sort of way. He kind of, and I know that part of that is probably just the way in which science futurism, or futurism and science fiction has evolved, right? The language that we use is often done in this sort of predictive way, as in we're trying to predict the future. But I think who was it? Not Octavia Butler. Maybe she has said something like this, but no. Goodness, I was just reading her famous author. She makes a lot of famous stuff there. Damn, I'm so mad I can't think of her name. But she was saying something to the effect of like, Ursula K. Le Guin. Goodness, so sorry, y'all. Got my mind. But I think she was saying something to the effect of like, we're not really predicting the future. We're exploring, right? Or we're creating, or something like that, right? And that's something, how I see it, is like, I'm not trying to predict futures, and I don't think it's helpful or useful to really predict the future. If anything, it can be harmful to put the language in that way of, oh, this is how things will be, or can be, or even might be, because it's still, and especially when you have the moniker of the future, right? Because that assumes that we're on this linear path, right? And I think that's far from the truth. I think the reality is that we're the reality I think is just far more complex than we have the really great language for. But a better language that I'm trying to use more and more is the idea of multiple futures, right? The idea that there are multiple possibilities. And so when we're trying to talk about the future, it's more so talking about a future, right? And again, maybe this is just being pedantic, but I do think, especially for a channel like this, and for 500 years in the future, right? It can be very helpful to be cognizant of like how we're speaking about these things, because I can just as easily imagine a future, unfortunately, where unwanted pregnancies is not rare, right? It's still very common, because even to this day, it kind of is ridiculous that unwanted pregnancies or surprise pregnancies or accident, like abortion, is being seen as is being criminalized in many places, and or already is criminalized, even though we've had the technology for years to make abortion easy and ethical. The very idea that people are anti-abortion or pro-life, even though that they don't care, they're gonna set that all aside. But the point is that we have the technology today to make abortion, safe, ethical, and all these other things. But the politics and the culture, or the ideas around it, right, make those technologies very difficult for people to use, and therefore less funding and less support, and therefore a future like this, where you can have what he says just 100 years in the future, right, or by the end of this century, which is less than 100 years at this point. But the idea that this future can exist, where abortion or unwanted pregnancies or accidental pregnancies or whatever is rare, is unfortunately seems to be less and less likely to occur, because of how the overall politics around these things affects the technology, right? So all that to say that I think the way in which we think about the future needs to change, right? We need to think about how we're talking about a future that we want to exist, and how we might get there, and or how we're not going to get there, right? What are the things that are stopping us from getting there? Because a big, and this is another reason why I want to get on this, and talk like this, is because I think a lot of people have this, if you have this linear idea of the future and where things are going, then you kind of have this passive thing of just like, oh, this is just how things are going to be. And that could be whether you have an optimistic view or pessimistic view, it's still harmful, right? Whether you're thinking, oh yeah, 100 years in the future, we're going to be in space, we're going to be doing this, we're going to be doing that, cool. And then you think you can just sit back and just wait till you can get there, or just be like, oh yeah, things will get fixed eventually. Or if you have a pessimistic view and you're like, oh, it's going to be cyberpunk, everything's going to be horrible, everything's going to be, surveillance capital, blah, 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 right? Then you're still sitting back and you're just like, oh, so might as well, who cares? Either way, you have a sort of passive attitude about the future, right? Because the future seems out of your hands, right? The future seems like something that you're not going to be able to control, that you don't have a way, that I'm talking you listening to this, right? Don't have a hand in participating, right? Don't have a hand in creating. And I think that's why we have to modify how we say these things, right? Because it's not just in the future this will happen. It's in a future it might be possible to create this world, but unfortunately, if XYZ doesn't happen, that future is unlikely to happen. So anyways, let's continue.
60, 90, or even 160. That makes it difficult to predict how quickly we'll produce new people, but if we assume a steady 1% growth rate, similar to today's, then reaching a trillion by 2525 seems reasonable. However, I think you only get that number if a significant portion of the population is living off Earth and expanding colonies across the solar system. What portion of that population would be classified human is hard to say. It might be 0%. Much like life in 2323 AD, our characters in this episode are not meant to represent the norm. The odds are that 99% of the human population in 2525 still lives either on Earth or in its orbital space, and if not, it's still probably at least 90%. Here, I explicitly state that we have a genetically engineered Jovian, an android, and an uplifted gorilla among our 10 named characters. I don't know that it would be vaguely representative of the population.
Yeah, so in the narrative, he has some of these different characters here, and I found it pretty interesting. I was like me, I would love the idea of like uplifting. I don't really know if I like that term per se, but the idea of uplifting other animals that are close to like our level of sentience, and we can communicate Like I think we should be able to communicate with whales, with chimpanzees, with gorillas, and even trees, right? We're starting to figure out that trees are, able to communicate with each other, or different plants, and through the, through the fungal network and things like that. So what would it be like if we can actually directly communicate with all the different life forms around us, right? Like what kind of reality, what kind of future would that look like? Would that feel like, And I think that's super awesome. Also, the other side of this, in terms of humans getting more into transhumanism and being like androids and actual sentient actual AI, guys. Whoa, I would love to live in a future where that exists as well. So I love him, kind of calling out some of these things too.
At large, but that's not really the point. In fact, Lyra in particular is meant to be a human-AI hybrid rather than a pure AI trying to look human, like our character Geary from 2323, or Lieutenant Commander Data from Star Trek. I also implied that most of the characters were quite old, but ironically, if you have a steady 1% growth rate, that would not be quite true. If we assume population growth has been steady, then 100 years before hitting a trillion people, the population would be about 368 billion, meaning 63% of the population would be under 100 years old, and about 40.
So this graph right here, let me move the closed caption. This graph is incredible. Just look about this. This is what I'm talking about the scale thing, right? Look at this scale. This right here is where we are. 8 billion people, right? That's more humans than have ever lived ever, right? 8 billion people. And yet this is nothing compared to how many people could be live, right? Could exist in, like, if we just have a 1% growth, right? Like, look at this, under 1% population growth. And in what, 500 years, you could be living in a world where there's like more people than you can truly ever imagine. Like none of us can actually imagine what 8 billion people is like. Right? You can't even meet a billion people in your life, right? So 8 billion people going to a trillion people is incredible. But yeah, this is what I mean by scale is so important to recognize. And even though this seems like a very long time, 500 years, what he mentioned there is that, and he talks about this in other videos too, is that we can have life extension technology to the point where we don't have to die in 100 years. We could easily create, or theoretically, you can create technology that allows you to live comfortably, right? Not at an old age, right? In terms of your actual health span, right? To where you could be living like you're still 30 or 40 into year 400. Right? Like, what does that look like? What is that like? That seems incredible to me. So there could be people alive today that is able to experience this entire shift into a 500-year future where you're now living around a trillion people, right? But yeah, he also mentioned how a lot of these people aren't going to be living on Earth, right? And we're going to get into that shortly, so I won't talk about it.
Would be under 50. As we discussed before, there's a strong reason to be moving people to new places, as population growth demands more room, but it's not actually a compelling reason to be colonizing interstellar space, let alone a neutron star system 400 light years away. I could easily imagine that by this point, humanity is trying to stabilize population growth on Earth by incentivizing migration elsewhere, but the solar system would hardly be full at this stage. If we assume a trillion people and 1% annual growth, that means 10 billion people are being born each year. Maybe a bit more if death from accidents, murder, or suicide, or sheer boredom is still happening. Earth might need homes for 10 billion new people annually, more than currently lives here. Would also have all the energy, manpower, or robot power needed to casually build a new O'Neill cylinder for every million people migrating off-world. That means 10,000 new O'Neill cylinders would enter service every year. However,
think about that, bro. A billion people or 10 billion people every year. That's more than the entire population of this earth being born every year. And a lot of those people are living in space in these O'Neill cylinders. So for those who don't know, all right, let me put you on game a little bit. These O'Neill cylinders are incredible, right? It's this idea of having a space habitat. And it's not like those boring like The Expanse type stuff. Like, personally, I hate The Expanse. I don't gonna say I hate The Expanse, but like, I don't watch The Expanse, right? I watched like the first season or two, and I was just like, I can't do this, right? It's just too negative for me. Yeah, it's just too negative for me, right? I like this idea of a O'Neill cylinder where it's like this beautiful space. Like, just go look it up. Actually, we could do that here, right? Just so you, and Isaac Author has many videos about like O'Neill cylinders and other types of space habitats. So go check out those videos. But this is what an O'Neill cylinder can look like. These videos or these pictures are very small. Trying to blow it up. Okay, I don't know what's going on there. But yeah, like, if I can Zoom in. There we go. But yeah, like this is not, it's not some closed space where you feel like, where you feel claustrophobic in these little tunnels of a spaceship or everything like that. It could be a wide, expansive field, right? It could be a city in space, in an enclosed environment. It could be, you have your fields and everything like that. Now, honest, obviously, this is like, this curvature right here is exaggerated for the art, but the point is that, like, in the O'Neill cylinder, like, you won't even see the curvature that's close to you if it's big enough, right? You won't actually see the curvature unless it's in the distance, right? And that could be a very interesting space. And there's a whole bunch of different ways of doing this. One of them is like, you know, where you're living on it and like the curvatures are kind of ahead of you and the sides is open to space, versus another where like the whole thing is enclosed, more like a can type of thing. Um, there's another type of version where there's a bunch of different smaller cylinders all connected together. Um, but yeah, like the, the idea of an O'Neill cylinder is essentially that you have a space habitat, you have space habitats in space, and what he's saying here is that you have 10,000 space habitats being um, built out every year, right, to fit all those people. And what that looks like is essentially like an island, right? Imagine a huge island, like not like maybe even bigger than, I forget the exact measurements, but probably like on the scale of Hawaii or bigger. But all of them are in space. So you have plenty of space, right? You'll literally have so much space, and it gets into a little bit more. So let's continue here.
System of space, or
So
more.
like I said before, I did watch a little bit of this video or some of this video, maybe like up to here or so. So I haven't watched the end yet, but I was watching it. I was just like, oh man, this is just so awesome. I need to do a recording. But anyways,
Broadly, Earth's Hillsphere, the region where objects orbit Earth rather than the Sun, could comfortably hold over 1 billion O'Neill cylinders. Indeed, they would be quite spaced out. The maximum is ensuring enough sunlight and room to radiate waste heat. At this rate of construction, we could keep building them for 100,000 years before things started getting crowded, even just in that available sunlight sense, and they'd still be tiny dots floating around in mostly empty cloud of space. Given that this region is close enough for real-time communication,
again, think about that scale, right? Well, this is why I hate when people are like, "Oh, overpopulation." Like, no, we can literally fit 100,000 O'Neill cylinders, each full of billions of people, or at least a couple thousand people, right? And so, literally, you can have a trillion people living here in this solar system, right, around Earth. Maybe not on Earth, but certainly around Earth, and it still be comfortable, super comfortable, right? To the point is like we worry today about what do you call it, space debris and like cluttering around the Earth. But it's not, it's the problem is not that there's a bunch of stuff around Earth. The problem is that there's not enough infrastructure, and there's not enough systems to take down old things that nobody is looking at. There's nobody's being like nobody's watching. So when things break down, all of the pieces just flying around. So the problem is not that there's too much stuff in space. The problem is that there's too much trash, right? And nobody's looking out for it. Nobody's taking the trash out of the way so that when things are crossing, it gets impacted and everything like that. So all that to say is that like space is huge, right? Space is spacey, right? This is so expansive that you could fit. I'm not going to say infinite, but you could fit like more than we could possibly imagine. Like, pick a number, we could probably fit that many people in space comfortably, right? And the resources to build all that is already in our solar system, right? We don't have to get everything from Earth either, right? This is one of the reasons why I think space programs are incredibly important, because we can solve pretty much all problems that we have by just going to space, right? We're worried about natural resources and people getting too many resources. Go to space, right? We literally having two asteroid belts. Well, one asteroid belt and another asteroid cloud. A cloud of asteroids that has everything from water to freaking rare earth materials, and a whole bunch of other stuff that we don't know is even out there yet. Like, anything you can, I'm not gonna say anything you can imagine, but a lot of things that we use today in our industrialization and everything like that we're trying to get from Earth and is destroying the Earth, we could be getting from space with no negative impact, with no impact on any ecological system, because it's fucking space, right? Like, I feel like if you believe in a God, then God made space for us to expand into. Like I'm not a religious person, but like to me it's just so ridiculous when people don't recognize the fact that we literally have all the tools around us to live in an amazing utopian society. And I mean that in a protopian, word, right? Like a utopia. I've said this many times before, but I'll say it again if I need to. Utopia to me is not perfection. It's not about a perfect society. It's about a better society. It's about being able to create a society in which we're always trying to be better, and we're always having the ability to be better, right? To build better for everybody, right? And we have the tools to do that, right? That's what's so fucking crazy to me, is like we can actually do this. We can be starting this stuff today, right now. People have already been trying to start for the last couple of decades, right? But I'm not even gonna say it's just the politics. It's the beliefs, right? It's what you believe. You listening to this, right? It's what you believe is possible that stops us from doing this. If you believe that we can't go to space because we have to focus on what we got going on here, that's one of the limitations, right? If you believe that there's not enough resources, if you believe human nature is negative and violent and whatever, right? If you believe, all these limiting beliefs are exactly the things that stop us from doing this. There's no rules of physics that stops us from getting into space, right? There's no hard rules that stops us from living a utopian life. So like I'm like, yeah, we should be doing this. And so that's another reason why I want to do this video, because to tell you that it's your beliefs that's stopping us from living in a utopian society. Your beliefs. So like it could be as simple as just changing your belief systems, changing your ideas around what is possible, that enables us to do what you think is impossible. So yeah, let's just continue, man.
Just a few seconds of light lag, and that plausible future technologies could allow someone to travel to and from Earth within hours, days, or at most a week, and without insane energy expenditure. It isn't hard to imagine this is where most people would prefer to migrate. Not the asteroid belt, not Mars, and certainly not some dead planet light centuries away. Just an area likely to be viewed as the suburbs of Earth proper. On the flip side, even if only 1% of that
See, that killed me too. That just the idea of having a suburb in space. And again, when you say suburb, it could be very like that's why you have to be very intentional, like, because unfortunately the suburbs here in America at least are mostly terrible. Like they're like wastelands and stuff like that of ecology, and it's been one of the worst urban designs for cities in a long time. But it's been very popular in that like it's a meme, right, that has really taken over our society. And it doesn't have to, like, suburbs doesn't have to be the way in which we look at it, as is this car dependent, ecological wasteland that feels very, lonely for a lot of people, that feels very out of the way, and kind of, a space for like privilege, but also, lack of access and all this other stuff. But nonetheless, the idea that most people will be living in this area of like built environments in space rather than on Earth itself, or in far flung planets and stuff like that, is just so interesting, because in the vast majority of our sci-fi, probably in every sci-fi, right, at least in terms of popular media, the story of where people live in the far future is often like, oh, all these different planets all over the place, and a lot of problems happens there. But like what he's saying here, and it could be far more valuable. It's more likely that if and hopefully when we get into space, most people will still be living around the Earth, right? And that's so cool. So we can all be we could all be living in that the famous, the infamous, almost like sci-fi horizon thing, where you're like on a planet, or what seems to be a planet, and you see like a huge planet in front of you, that could maybe be our reality, because we're all in these space habitats, and the Earth is just like this big thing on the horizon. Maybe it won't actually be like that, because I think the view from the moon, the Earth still looks pretty small, because space is fucking huge. Did you know that all the planets can fit between Earth and the moon if they were all like butt to butt? Like if all the planets in our solar system were stacked together, apparently you can fit all of them between the Earth and the moon. That's how big fucking space is, man. View from the moon. Yeah, I think this or something like that is more like a realistic idea of how big the Earth is. So even here, Earth is still pretty big, but it's not like that huge sci-fi thing like this, you know, or like this. Like these are more fake, but yeah, the more realistic views is that Earth is still noticeable, but it's not like it doesn't take up the whole horizon, you know. So maybe people want to live in something like this, where the Earth is this huge thing on the horizon. Maybe you have to be super close, or maybe we'll come up with like some other way of, like the some window, some massive window, or like energy field. And by energy, it's like some sort of plasma field, or something like that. That is a lens that makes things seem bigger, so that space doesn't seem so too big, if that makes sense, right? Because I think a problem that people are going to have is that the human mind is not really built to recognize huge amounts of scale, right, and huge expansive spaces. So the feeling, there might be this problem where people are going into space and they feel this sense of like deep. I was reading this story, I forgot, it was Stargazer's War, and it's a web fiction that somebody is creating on Patreon. Go check it out. But they were talking about something to where you have this idea of like space sickness or something like that, or void sickness, where people were like look into space and like just go crazy. Now it's not just because of looking into space. It's a Zangxia, or like it's based on like Eastern fiction. It's like a cultivation novel where people are like getting energy and powering up, stuff like that. Whole other tangent, but the point is like this, just the idea of like people going crazy because they're like looking into the void and stuff like that is very interesting to me. I don't want that to happen, obviously, but it's very interesting. And I think if that poses a problem, maybe one thing people do is like try to create lenses where things seem closer, like planets and other things seem closer from the inside, so that you can just make things feel a little homely. But yeah, these are the types of problems I think is better problems to have. In my Building Better Future series I'm working on, that's one of the things I'm showing people is like utopia is not a perfect world where there's no problems. It's a world where we have better problems to solve, like what I just mentioned. Like we could be figuring out like how to make people more comfortable in space, as opposed to like how to hunger and war and stuff like that. Like it's like we could put those problems away, solve those problems, we're done with them. Now we have better problems to solve, right? More interesting problems, in my opinion.
Population growth will be put on interstellar ships. That would still mean a ship carrying 10,000 colonists, a fairly common number in space opera, would be departing for a new star system every single hour. I imagine this was more the case
every hour. A spaceship carrying 10,000 people is going to a different solar system every hour. Like, imagine that scale. Like, I live next to an airport, and every 7 minutes there's a plane going over, and there's like 100 people in those planes, right? Now imagine that, but these people are going to another fucking star system, man. Like, oh, that's so fucking cool. I'm sorry, I just get so excited with this stuff, man. And if I'm pausing a lot, just go watch the video. This is why I wanted to do this, because I wanted to pause and geek out about this.
for the first ship sent to Alpha Centauri, where our captain, Dominic Rourke, served as a junior officer before returning years later with everyone from the colony who missed home, or like his XO, was born on the trip or during the colony's early days and wanted to see Earth outside of a history book or virtual reality program. A large, established civilization with extensive space infrastructure will have many ways to launch interstellar ships more efficiently, such as particle beam launchers, magnetic accelerators, or laser sail arrays. Once a colony sets up that kind of infrastructure, you would naturally see waves of return trips as well as follow-up fleets from home carrying more settlers and trade goods. But if we were sending only one of these 10,000-person colony ships to each new star system, then by 2525, we might have sent a ship to every single star or habitable planet within 400 light years, though almost none of them would have arrived yet. More likely, by that point, we'd be sending much larger fleets to promising systems or follow-up waves to recently established colonies, often as soon as we received a signal confirming they were alive and had successfully refueled their fusion reactors at the destination. Our numbers highlight the practical challenges in setups like this. A 26th century civilization.
Now, I don't know if he goes into it at this point. This is about where I stopped. But earlier on in the narrative, he was saying something to the effect of like, people basically, and he talks about this in other videos too, but the idea that people might get bored a lot, and this is one of the critiques I have for Isaac Arthur, is like this. I think the idea of boredom is overplayed in a lot of his things, and it's understandable why, because in our current world, people get bored for any number of reasons, and there's a huge problem with people getting bored and then doing some crazy stuff, and there's a huge history, right, of humans getting bored and doing crazy stuff, right? So very understandable. But I think that there's something to be said for the fact that we can think about these problems beforehand, right? So if we know that we're going to go on a journey that's going to take hundreds of years to get there, and regardless of if it's a generational ship, meaning like people are living and dying in that ship, or if it's one where people are have a long lifespan, we can actually live that long, or where it's more you're just in stasis for that period of time, right? Whatever way you look at it, or I mean, stasis is more of the solution, but the point is that like we're gonna think about solutions, right? We're gonna recognize that, oh yeah, people are gonna be bored going on a multi-generational or 100-year, multi-century, travel. So I think people are going to figure out or can figure out new ways of engaging people in that time, right? So say for instance, like a couple things that often come to mind for me in generational ships is one, having virtual reality simulations where you're experiencing different lives or doing different activities, or even playing like really incredible virtual reality MMORPGs or something like that, right? And people can either make these, or you can have AI systems that are constantly making these games better and more engaging, so that during the time of the travel, people are engaged with something, right? And on top of that, it doesn't just have to be because you could consider maybe people would be too either people would be too into the game, right, and they won't want to leave afterwards. That might be an interesting book. Or people would be get bored of the games, right? But I think both of those are also solvable problems, right? Like you can have people, for the people that get bored easily, they can either jump into, there could be a bunch of different games, or you can have that game, like I said before, maybe there's an AI over system, that I was going to say overlord. Yeah, let me not get into that. But you can have an AI system that helps to, once again, make the game engaging, personalized for each player, right? Or you can even have, there might be concerns about the games being too engaging, and that people are so focused on the game that they won't want to leave and establish this new colony. And so instead of just the game being a game, you can make the game be like part of the system of setting up the new colony, right? The new and if you concerned about the use of colony, because I am too. I don't really like the term colonizing anymore, for obvious reasons. So you could say, settlement. I don't really like that term either. Maybe we'll come up with new language, but people traveling and establishing themselves in another system. Either way, the game could be about that, right? The game could simulate what it will be like to create this new society on this new world. And so all the problems that you're going to have in creating that new world, you'll already simulate in the game, in the simulation, and whatever you're going to call it, right? And again, you can make it engaging, so it doesn't have to be this boring. Oh, here's what you're going to do first. No, for instance, my job as a designer, literally my day job, is to make training simulations that are fun for people, or at least interesting and engaging, right? They don't always get to be fun because we have certain stakeholders who want different things. But the point is that there's people like me who make it a living to try and make these simulations more interesting to people, right? So if this is so normalized where there are 10,000 ships leaving for a space, odyssey, then yeah, there's going to be hundreds of thousands, if not millions, if not maybe even billions of people like me who are trying to make simulations and all this other stuff more engaging for people. So I think this is an example of how you can get a little bit too locked into what your idea of the future is. If you say it as the future and this is how things would be, and this is why I prefer to try and have a more expansive idea of there's multiple ideas here, there's multiple futures that can happen. And I may not know the solution to this problem right now, but maybe somebody else might figure it out, right? So I don't want to pose this as this is the types of problems that people are going to be dealing with, because it might not be. Maybe that's it's not even an issue anymore. Maybe the problem people have is just I don't know. I don't know. You can. I'm gonna have to think about that, because I do think it's useful to try and think about unique problems people will have in a future, and I'll have to think about that, because I think that's actually very interesting. What are some unique problems people might have going on a multi-generational odyssey? That's not just boredom, or just people rebel because they don't want to be in this journey anymore. Because I think all of that is kind of solvable problems. the idea of people rebelling and be like, oh, or like I think I don't know if he just said it or he's about to say it, but like the idea that there is like the kids being born in this generational ship now, are they still going to want to be on this ship? Are they still going to want to, live in a world where you have go to another space and to set up that colony? Like, are they still, how are they going to feel right in this situation? And that might seem like a novel problem, but it's really not, because we have a huge history of nomadic cultures where people have went on multi-generational migrations, right? Like in Africa, you had the Bantu people who entire culture for thousands of years, their entire culture was migrating around Africa and doing different things, right? So you can pull from them, like, what did they do in these situations? And another example is the very migration that created the natives here, the indigenous people here in the Americas. They had a multi-thousand-year trip from Africa into Asia, all the way into the Americas, going down to the from the top of Americas down to the bottom. So, like, we have examples of history. Another example is the people who went from Asia to across the Indonesia peninsulas or the islands and into Australia. The Aboriginal Australian people, and a lot of them still have stories of what it was like making that trip, right? Some people don't believe those are accurate stories, but they have those stories, right? So we have many examples of people doing these migration patterns, and so I think we should be able to pull from them and like figure out, well, what did they do? And I think that will inform us today. So yeah, all that to say is like there's just so much here, we could be thinking about.
Would have all the resources to send endless waves of settlers into space, but little motivation, at least when it comes to needing more space or resources. As we noted in our episode on Exile of Space Colonies 2 months ago, colonization would mostly be a way to get rid of troublemakers, people who either disagree with mainstream society or the ruling powers, or who simply want better jobs and don't want to wait centuries for promotion. After all, it's often better to be governor of a habitat of 100,000 people in the Kuiper Belt, a colony that will grow over time, than be a junior undersecretary in a bureaucracy so vast that you have to wait centuries for your superiors to get bored or retire. And that's not a great strategy for advancement either. The people at the top tend to either be workaholics to the point of monomania or have exceptionally strong survival instincts, traits that make them unlikely to step aside. Generally, you
Yeah, so this is one of the things that is one of my biggest issues with Isaac Arthur, is like he has a very specific view of how he thinks people might be, and again, it's understandable, like, because he comes. I think he even says. I think he comes from a military like background, right? So that is his perception of life. But for me, who comes from, I'm not gonna say I came from an anarchist background, but I tend to view the world from an anarchist lens these days, and I find it very useful. So to me, especially in a world where you have this technology to create, for practical reasons, I'll say infinite, different worlds and different makeups, I think is far more likely that you'll have a number of anarchic societies, meaning you have a bunch of societies where people are more egalitarian, have a more flat, relationship with their society, right? And so you won't really have an instance of like companies where you're living or you're in an organization and you're working and you have managers above you who have been in that position for hundreds of years, right? I think that's unlikely, because so long as you have the technology to create a world where people can just be like, oh, I'm just leaving here, I'm going to create my own habitat, I'm going to move to this other habitat or whatever, like, to me that means that there's less power, right? There's less ability for the people in power to stay in power, to even agglomerate, agglomerate, I think that's the word I'm looking for here. I'm pretty sure it's probably a simpler word, to concentrate. There we go. There's less of an incentive and ability for people to concentrate power and centralize that power, because people can just leave. So, and that's one of the problems that we have today, right? And that's why monopolies are so harmful, is because it makes it harder for people to leave. But if you have technologies that make it hard for monopolies to even exist in the first place, which is another reason why I think you have to have political conversations alongside the technological conversations. But anyways, if people can just leave, then you just won't have these instances. I think these are types of problems that won't really exist. And instead, maybe you have problems where maybe it's hard to amass, enough people to work on a certain problem. But then maybe I don't really see that as that much of an issue, because you can just have bots, and not AI, but actual bots that are really sophisticated that can allow you to help you build whatever you want to build, even without a team, right? So maybe a problem would be people being too individualistic, right? Well, we circle all the way back around to people being too individualistic, and not in a way of like, oh, it's just me, me, me. It's more so about like, oh, yeah, I can. It's so easy for me to just not work with somebody, to not work with other people, that you can get in your own circle of doing everything that you can possibly imagine just with bots and things like that. But the solution to that may be just recognizing that people, are not very, that being sociable is very important, is very valuable to us, and so many people might create societies in which fosters makes it easy to connect with people and has mediators and different tools to make relationship building easier, so that people won't want to just flee from any sense of conflict, right? So this is what I mean. Like every we could come up with a problem, but then there's a solution. There's and I'm not gonna say you might imagine, oh, then what's the point of even imagining this stuff? If there can always be a solution to any problem that you imagine. The point is even imagining it in the first place, right? Because I'm pretty, like, as you can see with Isaac Arthur, his imagination is extremely expansive, right? He's had this channel for years, and almost every video he comes up with new ideas of different futures and things like that. But I've never seen him really talk about all these things that I just talked about. Not because he's incapable, but because his perspective, right, is specific for a specific realm of ideas. And similarly, my perspective is also is looking at another realm of ideas, and your perspective might be looking at another realm of ideas, right? There's so many. This might truly be an infinite amount of ideas for us to talk about. And so that's why it's really beneficial if more people share those ideas and share their perspectives on things. So yeah, yeah, let's continue.
Can break most people's primary motivations into one of four basic types. How many types and what to call them can be debatable, but we'll go with money, power, pleasure, and fame. That last is often prestige or honor. Most of us are driven by most or all of these. We have what it tends to be foremost to us personally, which may or may not shift over time. As Arthur Brooks tends to put it, borrowings, traits that make them unlikely to step aside. Generally, you can break most people's primary motivations into one of four basic types. How many types and what to call them can be debatable, but we'll go with money, power, pleasure, and fame.
Money, power, pleasure, and fame. I want to disagree with this because I'm trying to think, like, what am I motivated by? I hate money. I hate thinking about money, and the only reason why I want more money is because I know I need money in order to survive right now. So I don't even like thinking about money. Power, I don't like having power. Like, I've been in jobs where I had a leadership position, and I'm just like, "Ew." I'm only in that position because like I just was really good at doing the thing. So I'm not driven by power. I don't think. Pleasure, I have a problem where I often don't do things that will be pleasurable to me, because pleasure is almost scary for me sometimes. This kind of seems weird, but like oftentimes I I'm just not driven by pleasure very very often. I'll say that. I am driven by passion, but maybe you can see that as a pleasure. I'll be generous. I'll say maybe the things I'm driven by is, I'll call that pleasure because it's like passionate thing. So maybe that's the thing there. But it does seem a little narrow to put it in that category. And then fame, I do have a desire to be heard by more people, but not necessarily just because I want to be famous, but because I want more ideas out there, right? Like, if other people are sharing these ideas, I wouldn't really feel as much of an urge to want to share them, if that makes sense. Maybe I still might in some ways, but usually I do think it's beneficial for many people to share ideas, especially if they're good ideas, or at least really well thought out ideas. But I don't think that necessarily equates to fame. I think it's more so about being heard, right? Which is a human need, I think, is like having connection with other people. So yeah, this doesn't really, if anything, this comes off as more of like a negative, almost yeah, kind of a negative way of viewing human psychology. If anything, the things that people are driven by, you can go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or better yet, Kaufman's expanded idea on that, which re kind of relooks at Maslow, what he was trying to say there, and that it was never meant to be a hierarchy. It's more meant to be like a circle or expansive, thing of needs. So things like self actualization, security, having your basic needs met, connection, all these other things. Like these are the things that people are motivated by, in my opinion, which is not really, it's not really, it's more neutral in my opinion in many ways than this, because these four statements have an inherent, I guess, negative kind of connotation to it. And maybe that's just my own, bias against these things. But yeah, I do think these. Oh, excuse me. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I give him, what he's trying to do here. But to me, it kind of seems a little way too narrow and too biased towards a specific view of humanity.
That last is often prestige or honor. Most of us are driven by most or all of these. We have one that tends to be foremost to us personally, which may or may not shift over time. As Arthur Brooks tends to put it, borrowing from Thomas Aquinas, these are the four idols we follow, and we all tend to focus on one, often in a negative context, the concept being they are false idols. If you're curious, you can figure out your own by asking which you would drop first. If by dropping you just assured you had about the average or median amount. So if being assured an average wage worked for you, or average notoriety and respect, money and fame or honor are not yours. Often when trying to figure out how folks act in the future, especially in terms of who gets on board a colony ship, I try to wait in this sort of context, so I jotted one down for each of the characters as I outlined them. Other times I've done characters with a variety of Myers-Briggs personality test profiles, or other ones like the Big Five aspect test. It helps me avoid giving everyone the same motivations and behaviors. The only reason
Yeah, I think in my studies of this, because I was at a startup where we were trying to match people's personalities with like the jobs and things like that, and we looked at a number of these different psychology metrics, and the Big Five is one of the most scientifically accurate. But all of these, none of these are like really that accurate, because the realm of human psychology is so fucking complicated right now, or ever, like, period, that it's extremely difficult to say anything for certain, just because we don't know enough about how the human mind works, both in terms of like the neurochemistry of our brains, the consciousness aspect, and even like the kind of soft gooey like belief systems type of thing. Like there's a lot in this field that is very helpful, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot that we just don't know. And so I would hesitate to really begin like categorizing what people might be like in the future based on our incomplete ideas of how we are even today. But I grant, for creating a narrative, to try and create a narrative that feels realistic, that feels somewhat believable, it can be useful to use this stuff. So I give them that.
suspect more than 1% of people wouldn't want to jump on interstellar ships is because migration at that scale means truly leaving civilization behind. Even if those ships are luxurious, and they probably would be, at least by our standards, these are still long, long voyages with long, long delays in communication. We talk a lot about colonization, but that's not my main focus today. Here, it mostly serves as a backdrop for introducing our Canterbury-esque pilgrims and trying to
Yeah, I think that's an element too that would be very important to recognize, is that if you are on one of these ships, like the hard problems that we don't have no idea how we can possibly solve is the light problem. It's the speed of light, right? We don't really know if we'll ever be able to solve that problem. So I think it's fair to assume, to try and, like, when you're imagining possible futures, I think it's fair to assume, okay, this is the limit, right? Speed of light. Everything else we can play around with, right? And maybe there's other things here and there, but I think speed of light is one of the biggest things. So saying like communication might still be a difficulty 500 years from now. That I think that's fair. And we can come up with like things like, maybe they come up with some sort of quantum black hole technology where you can communicate faster than light through quantum black holes. But it seems so implausible, or at least it's so borderline possible, that like we can't really imagine what that looks like in a reasonable way, because it's so far away from where what the realm of reality actually is today, that I think any sort of imaginations in that realm of like faster than light travel and this, that, and the other, faster than light communication, stuff like that, is just like for fun, right? Which is fine. We can, I love that sort of thing too. But in terms of like doing stuff like this, where you're trying to craft realistic ideas of where we might be, I think it's definitely safe to kind of like all right, we may not be able to solve this problem type of thing.
Emphasized that 99% of 26th
Oh yeah,
century
sorry,
society.
but I did have this thing. I did have this thought that like because that's a problem that we know we'll have. I think one of the big things that people will do in these times is be like, okay, we want to go on this journey to this other star system. We won't be able to communicate back to Earth very easily, so let's like I think the only people or I think it's more likely that people are going to be going on those ships either with their entire group of people because remember these aren't small ships. They can fit 10,000 people. 10,000 people is more people than most of us have ever met, right? And so I think it's very likely that if any of us and if any people want to like do these embark on these voyages, they're going to go with everybody they know, right? It's going to be a huge thing where we have like some sort of apps or technology that allows you to communicate with everybody you've ever known at that point, and you're like, do you want to take this voyage together, right? And then people do decide that, or on the other flip side of that, it's going to be full of a bunch of individuals that are very individualistic and that they don't really have a strong sense of community, and they don't really care to communicate with people back on Earth or around Earth, and so they're like, yeah, I'll be in a spaceship with 10,000 strangers for 400 years, because at least that will force me to create this sense of community, right? Or they'll be in ships where everybody's just going to be in their own pocket, their own virtual world, and they know they're not going to have to communicate with anybody for 400 years. Maybe that's what excites them, right? Either way, I think you can have so many of these opportunities because 10,000 ships with 10,000 people, every ship can have a different motivation or a different way of organizing how people who's going to be on board and what they're going to do on board and so on and so forth. Like you have I think standardization is less likely to occur in this future or in many of these futures that for me because it's less useful, right, to standardize for everybody, especially in a world where you have this massive population where you have 1 trillion people, many of which might be experimenting with different ways of living, right? I think some things may be standardized, like certain technologies and safety procedures, but in terms of the actual organizing how people fit together or who's on board or whatever, I think that's going to be so versatile, like it's just so diversified that it's like almost anything is possible in that realm.
Society still resides in or around Earth, but colonization would be a major cultural shift, not because of its size, but because it would replace death as the defining moment in people's lives. In the future, you wouldn't call your friends or family to say, Grandma passed away. Instead, Grandma would call you to say how happy, but sad, she is their grandkid, Jane, the one from her 10th Donald Jill, you remember her, right, is migrating out to the moons of Jupiter or boarding a fleet bound for Tau Ceti. Or as in the case of Becky and Kenji Yoshino, after several hundred years, they might finally decide to migrate down to the Florida system, the Fornacis system.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting too, is that like instead of having like, a funeral for people, because death is probably less likely if we're able to come up with all these technologies to solve death, and that instead of just having a funeral for people, you may have these going away parties where it's like it's going to feel like a funeral in some ways, but at least that they are alive somewhere. But just on the thing of death too, because I think there is going to be a lot of people who still want to die for whatever reason, like I have people in my life who want to die at some point, who don't really want to live for an extended amount of time. And so I think there's going to be also spaces where what's the term, euthanasia is kind of common, where people are like, what, this is where I want to pass away now, and that's fair too, right? And so I think there's going to be there can be a vast realm of possibilities for like how you deal with like grief around people leaving and people transitioning and things like that. Even the idea of like people transitioning to a different creature, like for me, I think eventually I would want to expand my mind, like I would want to expand my body, I would want to transition into a whole nother form of being, right? And so I think that's going to be a realm of grief for some people, a realm of excitement for other people. And so there might be, types of events we do to be like, all right, I'm letting go of my, my human, or at least my, they might, I don't know, vanilla human, body and mind. And I'm going to step into this other role now. And now we're going to have like, it's a whole event around, what that feels like and how people are dealing with that, the emotions that comes with that and everything like that. So yeah, it's very fascinating to think about.
What kind of future awaits humanity 5 centuries from now? Today's episode begins the story of a starship preparing for a journey across deep space, a voyage lasting centuries. We imagine a civilization of abundance and wonder, but none of that happens without energy. In Antimatter Propulsion, our latest Nebula exclusive episode, we explore the most powerful energy source known to physics and how it could drive the future. Whether you're fueling starships or waging interstellar war, antimatter might be the key to building a galactic civilization or destroying one. Antimatter Propulsion is available now only on Nebula, the creator-owned streaming platform where all my episodes air early and ad-free. There you also find our monthly exclusives and incredible content from creators like Real Engineering, Angela Collier, and Up and Atom. And don't miss The Sojourn, a Nebula original sci-fi audio drama set on the fringes of the galaxy, where humanity's future hangs by a thread. With gripping storytelling and richly imagined characters, it's a perfect complement to today's visions of the far future. Today we look at lifetimes in the year 2525, and you can get a lifetime membership to Nebula for as long as you and Nebula like Antimatter Propulsion. $6 a year. Jupiter, a lot of colonization plans involving gas giants revolve around a hydrogen economy. Many people assume that means deuterium or helium-3 for fusion, but in reality that won't be the big economic driver in the 26th century. For most of the inner solar system, anywhere close to the sun than the asteroid belt, the primary power source will be solar because it's cheap, easy, and reliable. Even if fusion power is widespread, there's no reason not to use the abundant sunlight already available, produced by fusion freely in the sun. And even if fusion were dominant, fuel wouldn't be the bottleneck. No more than silicon is the bottleneck for solar panels today. Fusion fuel is everywhere and abundant, and when you break it down numerically, the demand just isn't that high. If we evenly distribute all the oil the US consumes annually among its citizens, the typical American uses about 23 barrels per year. What is the equivalent amount of deuterium to generate that same energy? 360 milligrams per person per year. 1 pound of deuterium would power 1,200 people for a year. That could be easily supplied by Earth's own oceans. In contrast, let's consider a mega figure from sci-fi, the kind hauling 1 million tons of deuterium back to power our resource-hungry Earth. At 8 billion people, Earth would only need that shipment once every 344 years. Ignoring that at that rate of consumption, it would be untoward millions of years before we'd appreciably decrease the amount available in our oceans. Even in a 1 trillion person 26th century civilization, the same freighter would only need to make the trip once every 3 years, and that's assuming they aren't using solar power for a significant portion of their energy needs. Thus, the Chaos Clade, envisioned as rulers of the storm-racked clouds of Jupiter, operating vast fusion fuel refineries floating in the sky, and engineering wind whales to ride the turbulent currents, along with massive biomechanical reefs dripping through Jupiter's atmosphere, are not sitting on a massive equivalent to oil fueling their wealth. Quite to the contrary, their primary export is just regular old hydrogen helium, used as bulk mass, propellant for ships, and water production. Ships wanting to move at high speeds were going through ridiculous amounts of hydrogen as propellant.
These types of scale and like the science of the stuff is why I really love this channel, because like this the type of stuff like I have no idea, like I wouldn't know, you know. I don't really know what deuterium is. I think he's talked about it in a couple videos, but like I've yet to really delve into that realm. But just to know there's people out there that recognizes that, well, yeah, we have energy sources, we have sources of energy that can allow for the abundance that we're looking for, that we need, and it's like right here available in the ocean. If you're worried about, you know, what the extraction process would be like, and I definitely feel that too, like that's why we should go to space, baby, because there's probably better ways of finding it in space that doesn't affect the environment. So I think this is why it's so important to have a more expanded mind and to have a better idea of what's possible, rather than just saying, oh no, it's not possible because blah 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 blah. Because like we could be doing so much more.
Meanwhile, water is scarce in the inner system, but abundant in the outer system. Yet water itself is 89% oxygen by mass, an element that is extremely common in the inner system and the asteroid belt, while hydrogen, which makes up just 11% of water's mass, is far rarer. So the true market for Jupiter's hydrogen is in shipping vast quantities of liquid hydrogen to the inner system, a trade that vastly outweighs the demand for deuterium. And while deuterium would still be sold, in many cases there would be no reason to separate it beforehand. Clients in the inner system could simply centrifuge it out themselves while combining with the oxygen they extract from rocks to make water. Compared to the need for bulk propellant, deuterium or helium-3 is simply a byproduct. Oxygen is a waste product of virtually every mining and refining process, as it makes up about half the mass of most materials we call rock, sand, or dirt. So when a liquid hydrogen tanker arrives in the asteroid belt or near the moon, it's not dropping off deuterium, at least not by the tanker load. If deuterium is being delivered at all, it's probably someone stepping off the tanker, carrying a propane tank-sized supply of it, and even then, it wouldn't be able to guard for fear of robbery, because it still isn't that valuable. Instead, that tanker is effectively delivering deoxygenated water, decarbonated methane, or denitrogenated ammonia, or anything else where hydrogen is only a small fraction of its actual mass but is needed in bulk. Given that icy moons and cometary bodies have an abundance of water, methane, ammonia, and other volatiles, combined with a lack of significant gravity, I'm not sure that mining gas giants would be economically competitive until after those easier-to-access resources were exhausted, which would take far longer than 500 years and a trillion people. However, a fusion-powered mass driver might have no problem slinging huge metal pods full of hydrogen or other gases out of Jupiter's gravity well. Energy consumption might not be a major issue, given an effective infinite energy supply floats in Jupiter's skies, and fusion reactors likely become more efficient the larger you make them. The excess heat can also be used for propulsion vents and for heating lifting gas, potentially allowing for floating continents in.
Yeah, he's just saying a lot of science stuff that's just amazing right now, so I wouldn't have much to say, but I would say, like, I like these visuals. That's something that also inspired me for my channel, because I really want to be able to do visuals like this. I don't really know where he finds these visuals. I think he puts some of the stuff in there, the description, but it's unclear to me, and a lot of these visuals aren't exactly what I would want to see. So something I've been thinking about doing, or I've been trying to do as well, is like learning some more 3D modeling, so I can like have visuals like this, but showing like solar punk, futures, and anarchic futures, and technologies and stuff like that I don't often find depicted and stuff like this. And so I just want to have more stuff like this. So if you know any tools to make 3D modeling in an easier way, I've looked up and down for years, because I have this, I'm not gonna get into that, but I have this old thing for like, I want to create better tools for that. Let me know, because tools like Blender is not super accessible, Like it barely even runs on my computer, if at all, and has been difficult for me to pick up. I've been using a tool called Spline Design to do some 3D modeling, but it's been a slow going, unfortunately. But yeah, let me know if you got some good tools or resources to find depictions or to make art like this too.
Jupiter's upper atmosphere, a topic we explored in more detail in Colonizing Jupiter. Alternatively, a fusion-based economy is far more viable in the outer solar system, where sunlight is too weak for solar power to be practical, and where fusion-propelled spaceships would be necessary for the higher speeds required to travel between points of interest. Beyond economics, I could see many human clades or engineered species, like uplifted gorillas, might be away from mainstream human society while still remaining within the solar system, which would be far cheaper than leaving entirely. A species engineered for low-gravity environments, particularly in our boreal primate species, might find mega projects like building space habitats or comet mining appealing. The same goes for humans engineered for microgravity, potentially even with functional wings for navigating bubble worlds, which they might wear like we would a jacket, or have cybernetically grafted onto them, or have genetically engineered into them. And when asking how far is far enough for a society to feel truly independent, the numbers come to play again. Most of us would feel historically safe if our fraction of humanity could hide out in an area the size of a county, 100 miles from the nearest human city. That's roughly the size of an O'Neill cylinder habitat. And even a densely packed Dyson swarm, O'Neill cylinders would be no closer to each other than this. Though you might get lashed together habitat conglomerations like intentional archipelagos in the ocean of the night, something we'll look at in a couple of months, as most people...
Yeah. So these are just super cool ideas. This is what I love, this channel. It just really makes me think of it really helps me expand what I think is possible. But on that idea of where he was talking about, the genetic, just like genetic, these cybernetic things and things like that. I think genetic engineering. There we go. I think that's super awesome. And I think that's something I think about often as well. Is like how could we make a world in which people can easily change their form or just add things to their form or take things away like that, like putting on clothes, man. I think that really excites me as a person who feels often constrained in my body. I would love to be able to switch forms very fluidly. So that's personally, that's a future that I am very excited for and really want to go towards more of. I think if we live in a world where people can so easily change their entire form, their entire sense of being, I think that will also, or at least that can also really help people be more connected with each other, because they realize that all these surface level distinctions between us is meaningless in the grand scheme of things. If we could just change our forms like that, what is race and sex and all these other things matter? It doesn't really make sense. At the same time, though, like I said before, it's not like this is inevitable, right? Because it's just as likely that people can, because they can change their form, people might, people might discriminate because you don't change your form, or because you choose a certain form that seems, that's not as trendy as others, right? And I think that the difference between these two ideologies is not just human nature. It's the mechanisms, right? It's the philosophies, it's the industries, or the environment essentially that is created that fosters certain belief systems, right? This is what I really want people to understand, is that I don't think human nature or the things that people do is completely innate, right? I think a lot of it is influenced by the environments that we have, right? So a lot of the behaviors that you may not like in other people I don't think it's just the fact it's just from other people. I think it's from the environment fostering those sorts of behaviors in those people, incentivizing bad behaviors, or incentivizing antisocial behaviors, or just not creating the space for people to truly connect at a better level. So I think it's going to be just as important not to just create these technologies that allow you to do all these things, but to create this overall systems, the environment, the governance systems, the political systems, the philosophical systems, right? That can inspire people towards a more, I'll say, open and transcended and inspiring and just better way of thinking about the world, as opposed to the alternative there. Let's continue.
Something we'll look at in a couple of months, as most people like living near each other. The point is that there's a lot of empty space for those who do not. Now consider 1,000,000 miles. That's 100 times farther than just about any two places on Earth are from one another, and yet it's still only 1/100th the distance to the nearest planet. Go live in the Kuiper Belt, and now you're 1,000 times farther apart than that. Your nearest neighbor might be millions of miles away, the kind of isolation that makes a truly independent society possible. If 1,000,000 miles of empty space all around you doesn't make you feel safely isolated, why would 1,000,000,000? But even then, if true isolation is the goal, the Oort cloud should beckon more than another star system. Because no one is going to invade you to steal your big icy asteroid 100 miles across, sitting 100 billion miles from the sun. But if your splinter of humanity, or near-humanity, tries to claim an entire solar system, even 100 light years from Earth, don't assume that others won't show up sooner or later, demanding a share of that oasis you claimed. No different than a single fishing village on the Pacific coast trying to claim the entire ocean for itself. As for 99% who are not fleeing to the belt, or other stars, they still have another outlet, one that leads to strange new worlds of a different kind. Whether they're living in something akin to modern video games or advanced VR like The Matrix, or have fully uploaded their minds, straddling the hazy boundary between AI and human, the reality is that as long as you have computers and energy, digital existence remains the cheapest way to accommodate people who want something that regular Earth and society are not offering them. You could have massive computer stacks rivaling the size of skyscrapers, positioned outside any city, acting not just as servers but as downtown hubs, places where people spend most of their time, virtually rather than physically. Or some might physically relocate to giant armored bunkers, entering amniotic pods like the ones seen in The Matrix, stacked 1,000 wide and high, forming a city of 1,000,000,000 minds, not in streets and towers, but in digital landscapes of their own creation. Just some big armored pyramid where nutrient fluid was made by recycling waste material and non-organically processing that back into carbs and protein. If you want to
So this is what I mean. Like it could be very scary to think about this, right? To think about a world where a lot of people are not even living in the world, right? They're living in a virtual world, and their physical body is just like in a jar somewhere, all right? That can be very scary, and that can seem dystopian. But you have to really expand, like, is this consensual, right? And not just consensual as in like, oh, is everybody else doing it? But like, is this something to where people have like considered all the options? They're like, oh yeah, I can do anything. I can go to space. I can go to this other world. I can, do this other thing. I can do this. I can do that. And there's nothing stopping me from doing it, right? Like I'm not limited in any way. But I want to, right now, my time of life, I want to go into that and I want to create a whole simulation for myself, right? And I think right now it seems like, oh, that's scary, that's dystopian, that's blah, blah, blah. But I think for me, as long as people have the full and informed consent to do this thing, right? And as long as people have actual freedom to choose, not just like, oh, there's a bunch, that's one choice and a bunch of bad options. But no, as long as it's like something where, yeah, they can literally do anything, but they chose to do this, then I think it's fine, right? Because I might do that, like at some point, like maybe for 10 years, a decade, I'm going to just live in a simulation, right? And I could do whatever I want to do there. And then for the next, I'm going to go, to this other planet, or I'm going to, go into the Oort cloud and live there for a little bit. Like that's what's so exciting about this stuff, is that if we create a world in which people are truly free to do whatever the hell they want to do, and at the same time, they're not limiting other people, then you have this vast realm of possibility that opens up, that allows you to really explore these possibilities. And that's why I think it's very important for us to recognize the what this looks like, and how we can create that freedom, that sense of actual true freedom, right? I think that comes from putting down this idea of like having to have this central government, having to have this super powerful corporations, these capitalistic organizations and things like that. Like I think those are the things that limits people, right? Those are the things that stops you from being able to live the life that we're trying to imagine here. And you might think otherwise, but that's why we can have try and have discussion about it and figure that out. Yeah, to me, if we are able to create these different worlds, then we have to also be open to the possibility that people might want to live in a simulation for an extended period of time, or maybe their entire lives, right? And it's not up to you to decide for them. It's not up to you to be like, oh no, those people are terrible people, I'm gonna go kill them, or I'm gonna go take them out, or I'm gonna make it so that they can't do that. Like, who are you to decide that? Like, that's the type of mentality that we have to put away, that we have to let go, and we have to foster a more expansive idea of what is possible and what we're going to not just allow, but what we're going to be happy of. Or not, I mean, I'm not going to say when you can be happy. You could feel however you want to feel about it, but so long as you don't take it in heart to try and stop other people from living their dreams, then that's what matters to me. It's like, don't try to stop people from living their dreams.
Leave, they'll give you an exoskeleton and massive amounts of steroids to handle your atrophied muscles. Or things might be even more packed and cheaper to run with brains and tanks, because with sufficient technology, they would not even need an android body to ride in. They could exit by just having their old body regrown, or kept on ice so you could thaw it and reimplant the brain, which might be cheap, but the computers also need major cooling. As I noted before, you're more likely to expand ecosystems and nature preserves in space than to try and restore them on Earth. In a future where land on Earth is the most valuable real estate in the universe, freeing up millions of hectares to regrow a forest might be far more difficult than simply commissioning a few space habitats designed for that purpose, ones that can be placed somewhere safe from human interference. Invasive species and unwatched poachers would face a much greater challenge trying to infiltrate a sealed space habitat than sneaking into a terrestrial preserve. Though the latter might relish the challenge, they have to survive thousands of miles of vacuum first, and if they made it that far, they still need to breach the giant armored shell of a habitat, one that is covered in cameras, sensors, radar, and most likely, gun turrets. To my thinking, this is what much of humanity is up to in this era. See an episode we did about 2 years ago, Space Habitats, for more details on some of the variety of structures themselves. By 2525, I expect construction of these to start taking over as a major economic driver for growth. Either you've lost...
Yeah, just real quick on that, the other aspect of like people with, like trying to invade these other space habitats or like other areas. I think a big thing that is important to recognize is that like it doesn't have to be like this is why I made that whole thing about like not stopping other people from their dreams, right? Because even to this day, right, a big reason why our world is the way it is because people believe that other people shouldn't live the life that they want to live, right? It's as simple as that. Like it may seem like all complex and everything, but the truth is that certain people believe full-heartedly that you should not, be gay, or you should not be non-Christian or Catholic or Muslim or whatever, right? Like they believe that you cannot live the life that you want to live. You have to live how I want you to live. And that is one of the biggest problems that I see today. And going into this, like, I think that's one of the biggest barriers as to why something like this will be very difficult. Is because not because it's technologically impossible, but because people's mentality, a lot of people's mentality is very constrained. And like I said before, it's not just people's mentality are constrained innately, right? It's that they were raised in an environment where that's what they were taught. They're taught to believe that this is how humans should live. And if you don't do that, then you're evil or you're bad or I have to change you, right? And so I think that's why it's even more important to do this, to share these other ideas out there and to show people, to expose people to other ideas and concepts and ways and ways of being, possibilities, because that breaks people out of these, echo chambers, that breaks people out of this indoctrination and allows people to change their minds over a longer period of time, or sometimes even very quickly, depending on the person, right, and the stage of life. But I think you could possibly have a future in like this world where you have that's one of the problems I actually do see, is that like you can have a problem where certain of these habitats, it might even be a small percentage, but the fact that you can have 10,000 habitats, or more, that means you can have 1% or less than 1% of people, or it might be one habitat or a couple habitats where people have a very, very extremist view where they're like, oh, the way everybody else is living is wrong, and that they're gonna make it their problem to mess with everybody else. And yes, that can be very harmful, that could be very scary, and that could be very that can mess things up for a lot of people. But I don't think that needs to be the reason why we shouldn't do this, because for the vast majority of people, they'll be living great lives. And so the problem or the solution to me will be therefore, how can we minimize that problem even more, and how can we mitigate that problem? What can we do to, when we do see those people coming out and try to mess with everybody else, how can we lock those down, right? So I think it's less likely that we're going to have warfare on a large scale. I think it's more likely that you're going to have very, very small but noticeable extremist groups who are like, I don't like how other people are living, and then go around and try to mess people up, or try to form cults, right? I think cults may be an even bigger problem in this world, right? Because you can have a whole space habitat where there's literally nobody else around except you in that space habitat, or that cult in that space habitat, and they can really foster extremely like out of the like crazy thoughts. And so I think there's going to have to be various types of task forces, not police, because there's no, in my world, in my future, there is no like government and there's a police system and everything like that. I think there's going to be different task forces made of concerned citizens who are like, I'm worried about this problem, right? There's going to be people who are worried about problems like this. And so they're going to then come together and be like, okay, what can we do to fix that, right? How can we find these people before they become a problem? How can we make sure that kids being raised in these environments are actually exposed to the wider world, so they're not, stuck in these coats. I think that's going to be a important aspect there. So yeah, just relating this back to where we are today, NIMBYism to me is a huge example of this today. Like we could be living, like I live in a suburban neighborhood where we have a freaking HOA that doesn't even live here. There's some other organization, but we have a lot of people here who want to mow their lawns, for instance. But in reality, a lawn is very terrible for the environment. Like it's a wasteland. Like it's you put all these pesticides in there, you kill all the indigenous life and all this other stuff, and it's very bad. And ideally I would like to have rewild my lawn a little bit, so you have more indigenous plants coming back up. We can have areas where that's safe for things like the what do you call them, the crickets, or like fireflies. Fireflies are becoming endangered, crazy. But I would love to see more fireflies, so I would love to create like spaces where fireflies will come in during that season. But that is like illegal according to the HOA, right? And it's because of this idea of like this NIMBYism of like other people trying to control how other people are living their lives. And so that's a great example of why that makes our society today so terrible, is because of that. We could be living in way more walkable cities, and cities that are way more friendly and engaging and interesting for a lot of people. But you have these NIMBYs, and you have these people who are like, everything should be just cars everywhere, and that makes it harder to build a utopia here right now, which we can do. So all that to say that, yeah, like this idea right here of recognizing how different people are like living their lives and what's possible can only really work, or no, I'm not even gonna say can only really work, but has to also be very cognizant of the existence of people who unfortunately are trying to limit other people, and you have to have a strategy for that, right? You have to have systems in place that can take away their power and make it so that they don't have the power to stop you from living your own life. And I just think that's super important to recognize there. Yeah, let's continue.
And those AI overlords might not even be computers. They could just as easily be transhumans who have wired up their own brains using the same kind of technology that make AI so impressive. It's a bit of a suspension of disbelief that we work into many of our episodes, just like sci-fi hand-waves FTL travel, because in reality, your typical human centuries from now is likely to be heavily augmented in some way. That might be genetic, cybernetic, or simply wearable technology. A significant portion of your brain function, reflexes, and subconscious processes might be offloaded to computers you wear or access via the cloud, connected through a brain scanner no more noticeable than a pair of glasses or a hair clip. These devices wouldn't feel like external tools. They'd seamlessly integrate into your thought processes, responding so quickly that they'd function like an extra lobe of your brain, rather than something surgically implanted. You might not even need cybernetic or genetic engineering to enhance yourself. Instead, you could be so superbly educated, trained, and physically optimized that you could outpace any Olympic athlete or Nobel laureate while still having the same genetic foundation as people today.
And that's what excites me too, is like we could live in a world where everybody is like super smart and talented and incredible. And so the realm of like possibility and what people come up with is it can expand so crazily that it's very difficult to imagine what that will be like. We even say like we couldn't really imagine what that will be like, because it's just like, imagine you living in a space where everybody around you is talented, smart, capable, possible, like able to do whatever they put their minds to it. Today, many of us are stunted, right? Like I'm stunted. Like I lived through poverty for first 20 years of my life. So like there was many times where I didn't go out, I didn't go with, or went without food. I didn't have the type of nutrients I needed, or, didn't have the friends I needed. I didn't have the support systems, this, that, and the other. And so a lot of what you see here is not even my optimal. It's not even my chief potential. It's not even my final form. I could be so much better if it wasn't for, all the ways in which this society has stunted my growth, right? And now imagine that for you, right? Imagine that for your mom, for your parents, for your boyfriend, for your brother, for all these people. Like imagine this for everybody alive. If we could all reach our highest potential just by living better lives, right? Just by having a life in which you're not worried about poverty or this, that, and the other, right? Like human potential could truly expand beyond like ways of like, it could just be incredible.
Or 500 years ago. And as we often emphasize, given the pace of technological advancement, this you might not be hypothetical. It might literally be you or me in 500 years, left as a relic of this era, not thinking of ourselves as augmented any more than modern people think of medications or smartphones as enhancements. So, what option would you choose? Would you go all in on becoming a cyborg or android, living mostly in the physical world but heavily augmented? Would you be king in a virtual paradise, or a Disney princess, free to exit into shared virtual realities or normal life whenever you pleased, but spending most of your free time drifting between various fantasy realms? Would you upload your mind entirely, experiencing centuries of simulated realities in just a month of real time, pausing only occasionally to pop out into a Zoom call or an android body to handle business or visit friends and family, then returning with no time having passed, or even letting simulations keep running while you were absent? Maybe you join some hive mind or a part of the collected memories of some wider AI into which millions of human minds will scan. Would you own a farm on a vast rotating space habitat, or a domed colony on Mars? Would you board a ship to a virgin star system, or hold out for some crazy mission to the edge of reality to investigate an alien signal? Maybe you had yourself cloned or duplicated, so part of you could stay behind, and another copy left to explore strange new worlds. Would you modify your brain so that while inside various virtual fantasies, you believe them to be real, only recalling they were simulations when you emerge for real-world life, or pre-programmed breaks? Assuming we are still around to make any choices, the options would be almost limitless, and perhaps in such a future, in the year 2525, the hardest decision would be choosing just one. 500 years ago, we looked to the stars and imagined our place among them. 500 years from now, we may be more than we ever dreamed, yet still asking the same question we always have: what comes next? Because as much as humanity changes, our curiosity, our ambition, and our hunger for the future never will. Thanks for joining us for our 500th episode. I hope you'll stick around.
Beautiful. I love the way he ended that, man. No notes. I would try to do all that. You know. It's just so amazing. Yeah, I love as an author. Love their content. It's always so inspiring and motivational to me. And even though I have critiques often, I enjoy it a lot. You know, because I think it's super important to think about these things. So yeah, like, thanks for listening to this along with me. If you have your own ideas, or things came up for you, put them down in the comments, or make your own video and tag me, let me know. Yeah, I just love this stuff so much. I love it so much. So yeah, we'll end it there. I don't know how long this ended up being. There's no timer on here. I should probably start a timer in one of these future videos, but hopefully it's under an hour. I know I was talking a lot. I wanted to aim for like 30 minutes, but I don't think it was 30 minutes. So we'll see how long it ended up being. But as always, thanks for listening. Let me know again what you thought about this, what you thought about my thoughts on his thoughts, what you thought about his thoughts, and so on and so forth. And have a great day. Keep imagining. Open up your mind more, imagine better futures, and keep being awesome. See ya. Bye bye.